All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keith White. I'm a meteorologist and our climate services focal point for the National Weather Service Austin San Antonio office. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon. I've got about 20 minutes or so of prepared slides here, and then we will go through some questions at the end. And I know a lot of you are expecting an Outlook talk, but you're also thinking quite a bit about last February's winter weather event. So I will be covering that just a little bit as well, hence the image of our snow-covered office grounds from last February here on the title slide. But first, let's talk a little bit about just the last few months. Here is a 30-day precipitation map showing just how dry it's been over western portions of south central Texas. Del Rio has been lucky enough to pick up over a quarter of an inch, but most of Val Verde County has been dry. And then even in eastern portions of the area, most locations seeing under an inch, except for our coastal plains counties, over just the last 30 days. And when compared to normal, this translates to a pretty widespread amounts of less than 50% of normal over the last month, and even less than a quarter of the normal rainfall over much of the hill country, and then down here into Dimmitt and southern Maverick counties as well. And these rainfall deficits also will stretch back over the last 90 days. Here's the raw rainfall amounts over the last 90 days across our area. And you can clearly see where the mid-October flooding event brought some pretty good rain totals to eastern portions of our area, right along the I-35 corridor from San Antonio to Austin, and then points eastward. But you can also see the opposite, where far southwestern portions of our area have been very, very dry over the last 90 days. Some locations less than an inch over the last 3 months. We'll see what that means for drought in just a little bit. So here's the percent of normal of those rainfall amounts. So of course, well above normal, where the bullseye of rain happened over portions of Wilson, Gonzales, Guadalupe counties. There was another heavy rainfall event here over the four corners of this region as well. But of course, very dry in comparison to normal down here in our far southwestern areas. In terms of temperatures over the course of meteorological fall from September 1st through November 30th, all of our area was above normal. This is really the only graphical depiction of departure from normal temperature I could find, but I did some spot checking, and this little green area here was due to some bad data at one of our locations. And then down here, these are a little bit too high. This should really be more orange. But still, the point is, it was a warm fall with temperature anomalies of anywhere from about a half a degree above normal to as much as 2.5 degrees above normal, and even at Del Rio, more than that, about 4 or 5 degrees above normal. So warm and dry was the story this fall for the most part, but that doesn't necessarily mean much going into the winter. Before we get to the outlook, let's talk a little bit about climatology for our area. So of course, last year we had a lot of snow, 6.4 inches over the course of 3 events in San Antonio, and then about the same amount in just a single event at Austin. And throughout the course of that, which we'll go through a timeline shortly, there were also several icing events. But when we look at the historical records, just going back over the past 41 years or so, our 3 climate sites only see measurable snowfall, which is greater than 1/10 of an inch, about every 2.5 to every 5 years, which means essentially in any given year, there's anywhere from a 20 to a 40% chance of seeing some measurable snowfall at these locations. And for snowfall amounts of greater than 1 inch, those probabilities go down quite a bit. It's closer to about 10% in any given year of seeing greater than an inch. So the fact that, say at Austin, we had 2 separate events, one in early January and then again in February, that was a highly anomalous winter for us. And then of course at Del Rio, they had their all-time record snowfall on February 18th of 11.2 inches, which then added up with a couple of additional inches a few days earlier to bring them their highest monthly total as well. So quite a winter last year. But again, looking at the long-term records, the chances of seeing snow in any given year are still relatively low given how far south we are in the country. Some additional winter climatology. We'll start here on the right, looking at, of course, our December through February meteorological winter. These are, the bars show average rainfall, while the lines show the average daily temperature, the average daytime highs, and the average daytime lows throughout the year. So, of course, now here in December, we're just about reaching the bottom as far as daily average temperatures go. Just another couple of weeks until we start to see those go back up again in January. And we are in a drier time of the year, especially for areas along the Rio Grande. They don't see a whole lot of rain in the winter time, in any year. And here on the left, in terms of severe weather reports, this is an entire climatology going back to 1955 for tornadoes, hail, and thunderstorm winds. And you can see that, and not a whole lot of severe weather reports in our part of the country here in the winter time. Of course, once you start to get towards the second half of February, we're starting to ramp up into spring, and we do see a slight spike there in hail reports. And that's even more pronounced in La Nina years, as we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But the takeaway here is severe weather doesn't occur here very frequently in the wintertime. Neither does flash flooding. Not very many flash flood reports here in the wintertime either. And that's largely due to how little rainfall we see in comparison to, say, the fall, late summer, early fall months, and then especially back into May. This map shows the typical average date of first freeze in the fall. And you can see here, even the lightest colors, our furthest southern areas, typically have their first freeze by about December 4th, so over a week ago now. And the red line here is our approximation of which areas experienced a freeze just the other night. So locations, approximately north of this line, with the exception of right in the city center of Austin, did experience freezing temperatures with our cold event just 2 nights ago. The rest of the region still has yet to experience their first freeze. We'll have to see. There may be a chance for that here in the coming weeks. And so let's switch gears here and talk a little bit about one of the main drivers for our climate in the wintertime, and that's the El Niño Southern Oscillation. So El Niño is the warm phase of this. La Nina is the cold. And when we say, a warm and cold phase, we're talking about sea surface temperatures in a specific region of the Eastern Pacific. And so here's a map of what the sea surface temperature departure from normal looked like here just yesterday. And you can see these blues are below normal water temperatures there in the Eastern Pacific. And this has a pretty noticeable impact on the atmospheric circulation that impacts our weather. So going back, we can see that currently we're sort of on the border between a weak and a moderate La Nina here with sea surface temperature anomalies over that region of about 1 degree Celsius below normal. And the forecast is for this to continue through the December, January, February period, and it looks like even into the early spring before we likely return to an ENSO neutral state, as is typical for the late spring and summer months in the Pacific. So here just kind of shows what the La Nina patterns look like. Here in Texas, in El Nino winters, typically, we see wetter years in this part of the country, but for La Nina winters, which again was last year and this year, warmer and drier conditions do typically prevail when you look at the long-term averages. And of course, this can't be stated enough. That doesn't mean there won't be cool and wet periods just like we saw last year, but there are many other factors that that are less predictable than El Nino and La Nina that go into creating those types of conditions. So let's break down what La Nina looks like for our part of the country. And so this map shows the Climate Prediction Center forecast regions. We're going to focus in on the ones that cover areas outside of our responsibility, but largely cover South Central Texas. And This tool that I use to create this is called the local climate analysis tool, and what it does is it breaks down the data of temperature and precipitation based on the state. So there's a lot here, but I'm just going to ask you to focus on these circled areas, and those are when we're in a La Nina state, or the oceanic Niña index is less than -0.5. And we can see here for CPC forecast region 62, that's this one here in the coastal plains, the bar is literally off the chart in terms of temperatures, in terms of the probability based off of our historical record of seeing temperatures above average in our region. And the same goes for precipitation. We do typically see below normal precipitation in La Nina years. And this pattern repeats itself for the other two regions that we're covering, maybe a little bit less so here in terms of temperatures for region 64, which is the Edwards Plateau. But pretty clearly, historically, not every year, but the majority of years that we are in a La Nina, we feature above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation. Taking a look at snowfall broken down by these same El Nino and La Nina neutral, we can see that on average we do have below climatological normal snowfall in wintertime. However, clearly we all remember last year, and we can also think back to the San Antonio snowfall of record back in 1984-85, both La Nina years. So while our chances of seeing snow may be slightly less, some of those more impactful winter events are still able to happen during La Nina winters in south central Texas. The breakdown of our severe weather events are shown here for both all events and then by individual hazard. And we can see that severe weather in the winter time is typically more favored during El Nino years. It can still happen during La Nina, especially with respect to wind events. But in general, with the already low, prevalence of severe weather in winter, combined with the fact that it's typically less likely to happen, means we're not particularly concerned with severe weather, at least over the next couple of months. That may change once we get into late February and then start warming up and getting into spring. We do typically see, and we saw this last year, an increased prevalence of hail events, especially over northern portions of our region in La Nina springs. But we're still focused on winter here. It's only December. So looking at the most recent 3 to 4 week probability maps from the Climate Prediction Center, we can see odds definitely continue to be tilted in favor of warmer than normal temperatures. 60% or above chance for South Texas for the Christmas Day through January 7th period. And then, a slightly better signal for drier than normal conditions over our Rio Grande Plains areas over that period that ends on January 7th. For the whole winter, this outlook is almost a month old now, but the general point still stands that we are expecting temperatures to likely lean above normal again. We've already seen that pattern beginning in the fall, and we've been essentially through this point in December at or very near the warmest December on record for our region. And with more warmth on the way, we may continue to pad that. We'll see how things wrap up at the end of the year, but these warmer than normal conditions are expected to continue through the winter. The same goes for precipitation. The odds aren't necessarily as strong. Over portions of central Texas, we're only just slightly tilting off of equal chances of above or below normal. And of course, with the nature of precipitation being as it is, some areas may see precipitation above normal this year, while others remain dry or even bone dry. But as it stands, still expecting to stay drier than a typical winter. So what that means for drought, which has already been expanding over the course of the last couple of months, is that we expect that to continue. As of right now, only about 21% of our region is in moderate drought status or worse, but we do have some severe drought creeping back into our southwestern areas, which, as I showed earlier, have been rather dry over the course of the last 3 months. And even looking back at longer time frames of a half a year and a full year, those areas remain below normal for precipitation. Of course, some of those areas were lucky enough to receive some good rains that have fought back the drought status, and that may continue for a little while longer. But if we continue to see dryness over the course of in December, January, and into February, we will likely see these drought outlooks gradually worsen each week. And that pretty much concludes the outlook portion of the talk, but I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about last year. And don't pay too close attention to these graphics. If you want to see them, I will be sending out the slides and posting this as a video, sending that out as well. But what I want to talk about is that while El Nino and La Nina are one of the primary drivers of our climate state, especially in the wintertime, there are other modes of climate variability that act on timescales ranging from only 30 to 60 days, like the Madden-Julian Oscillation, to even as long as decades, like the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And one of these important climate modes is the Arctic Oscillation. It's much more difficult to predict than El Nino, and it can work to essentially allow a breakdown of the jet stream in a way that can allow that cold Arctic air to spill all the way into Texas, just like we saw last February. And so here is a look at what the Arctic Oscillation looked like last year. Very, very strongly negative. And when we look at that against the historical archives going all the way back to 1950, it doesn't happen super frequently that the Arctic Oscillation state becomes that strongly negative, and that did have an impact on our local weather here and that cold snap. So real quick, a review of that event. It wasn't just one winter storm, as it kind of is talked about these days, almost a year later. It really was 4 separate winter events across our area, starting with an ice event over the hill country on the 11th of February, and temperatures over much of our area fell below freezing and then stayed that way for several days. Of course, the main event arrived on the night of February 14th into the 15th, where much of our region saw very anomalous snowfall amounts as high as 6 to 8 inches. It was bitterly cold after that, and then we weren't done yet because we still had another round of freezing rain and ice on the morning of the 17th. And then, of course, the last snowfall event that brought the 11 inches to Del Rio and another couple of inches to San Antonio came after that. Here's a look at the snowfall totals over the course of that week. This doesn't even include all the ice accumulations over much of the hill country, but clearly for our part of the country, much more snow than any of us are used to. And it wasn't just us, it was the whole state of Texas impacted by that storm. And then, of course, much of the Mid-South and a portion to the Southeast as well. And just to give you an idea of how out of the ordinary this event was, here's just some of the records that were broken. This is just at San Antonio. And you can imagine that similar records were broken at our other climate sites in Del Rio and Austin, both in terms of cold temperatures during the day and at night, and in terms of snowfall. In addition, the consecutive hours below freezing at Camp Mabry, 6 days, that was a new record for the site, and San Antonio came within about an hour of setting a new record at their location for hours below freezing as well. And when we take all of these events, this entire week, and look at it as a whole, it's really unprecedented in the historical record. It goes without saying, but it was sort of about a 1% chance of happening in any given year. And even if you just break it out into one of those events, we're looking at maybe about a 5 to maybe 8% chance of seeing, a snow event of a few inches across parts of our area. And so we certainly don't anticipate seeing anything like this happening again this year, especially given the current state of La Nina. Of course, we cannot rule out winter weather happening in our area, and it's always good to be prepared and keep an eye on the forecasts, as we get a better idea in the short term of what is possible meteorologically. But climatologically, we don't really anticipate a whole lot in terms of winter weather impacts. So just to summarize, in the wintertime, we're not really expecting impacts from flooding or heavy rain, so below normal there. Fire weather at this time, generally below normal, but as we continue to see dryness, if we don't see a whole lot of rain this winter, many areas, especially out west where it's already been dry, will likely transition to an above normal risk late this winter and into the spring for fire weather. And that's already being shown in some of the long-term outlooks by the National Interagency Coordination Center. In terms of severe weather, likely also below normal, and again, not really, dealing with severe weather in the wintertime here very, very frequently. But as we transition into spring, there is a chance that we could be looking at maybe an increased frequency of severe weather. And then winter weather, it's hard to say. It's entirely impossible to predict an event, more than about a week out. But looking at the historical data, not very likely that we're going to see winter weather impacts for much of our area. If we did, of course, they're more likely over our northern counties and in parts of the hill country, but you can never rule it out. And lastly, there's been a lot of chatter, especially among the public, about Farmer's Almanac outlooks, one of which is quoted here, talking about potentially frigid and flaky weather like you experienced last winter. And that's got a lot of people worried and hearkening back to what was really an awful week for a lot of people here in Texas. And what I will say is what they say right at the end, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared, is always a fantastic message. But I also have to say that it's a little bit disheartening to see so many people buying into these long-range outlooks that are made without really much scientific skill. They're really about as good as a coin flip at best, and they portray a level of confidence that's really higher than what's warranted. So I just want to end with that and say that we're not anticipating anything like what we experienced last winter, but again, it's always good to be prepared for winter weather should it strike. So with that, just my three main takeaways. I'll repeat this again. La Nina conditions through the winter will keep us tilted, odds tilted towards warm and dry. There will still be periods of cooler weather. This coming weekend will be one of those. And then based on historical reoccurrence, it is very unlikely that we'll experience a storm comparable to February 2021. And lastly, just some acknowledgements. I do want to thank Jason Runyon, a lead forecaster here, who gave an earlier version of this talk to some folks in San Antonio. But with that, I'll wrap it up and take a look and see if we've got any questions coming in here.